Hello everyone, the time is finally upon us where OWCS Asia has started their group stage, which means the return of consistent high-level Overwatch on our screens every week, and I'm sure we're all very excited. The Japanese group stage has started already, the Pacific group stage is starting in the next couple of days, and the Korean group stage is starting on Friday. And let's face it, the Korean one is the one we're all most excited about. It's got the best players, the deepest pool of talent, all these new cool combinations of players on new different rosters that we're really excited to see. So we're going to be talking in this video today a lot about that region, power ranking the teams, and that action all kicks off on Friday. And if you want to see my live coverage on my co-stream, you can check out my Twitch here, and we'll bring you some more analysis and other videos on this channel as well. So if you like all that stuff, subscribe, like it, follow me on Twitch, all that good stuff. Before we get into the actual power rankings of the team, though, I think it's important for us to remember where we are at the moment in the OWCS Korea group stage, and we're right here, slap bang in the middle. We've got our 9-team round robin. Of these 9 teams, 3 are going to automatically advance to the Asia LAN final, of which the top 2 of that LAN will go to the DreamHack Dallas and the big international event to play all the best NA teams and the best EU teams. Now we shouldn't forget there's also a wildcard spot where the 4th Korean team, 3rd Japanese team, 3rd Pacific team will play off in a round robin, and the winner gets to add themselves in this LAN. But if we're being frank, and I am being frank, it's going to be the Korean team, right? So it's essentially 4 spots available for Korea in reality, even though it's like a 3 and a 1. So really important which of these teams is going to be the top 4. And of those top 4, really important which teams are going to manage to be the top 2. So if we take a nice little look at this beautiful spreadsheet I made, we've got all the 9 teams here, and we've got all the players, so we can talk a lot about the rosters. The yellow teams on the left here are the ones that have auto-qualified from the open qualifier. They got straight through their group. The ones not highlighted are the ones who had to go through the last chance qualifier. We've obviously lost Team Has Been here. Maybe it was too optimistic to think these guys would really run it back and get into top 9 after not playing in so long, but it was a fun idea. I'm sure we're all happy to see these guys back and playing. But they don't make it to the top 9, so as far as this video is concerned, it's over for them. We do, however, have a lot of other teams to discuss, and we've obviously got the power rankings here. So again, the top 2 super important. These are the teams I'm going to think will ultimately go to Dallas and the DreamHack International event. And these are the other teams I think will make the top 4 and go to the LAN final. And then obviously we'll put the rest of the teams in order as well and see where we go from there. So the easiest way for the most part to start these power rankings is to start at the extremities, right? So let's start at the top in what might be a quite obvious bid for first place. Who do I think the best team is going to be? Well, the easy answer is Falcons. These guys have what most people are calling the best roster ever assembled. And I think that's true, because it's not just a load of the best players, they've actually got every hero covered. This tank line, Smurf and Hanbin, I think they are literally the 2 best tanks in the world. And they cover any holes they have in hero pools are covered by the other one. So this really seems like the perfect tank line. And I don't think you could ask for anything more. Stalker, obviously one of the best flex DPS in the world. Proper, also one of the best flex DPS in the world. And also, at least on some hit scans, one of the best too. I think maybe if we got to like a Widow meta or something, you might start to think Proper doesn't stack up to some of these other more traditional hit scan players. But let's face it, Widow's not really going to be meta except for some very niche places. So these guys will be more than fine. Likewise, the backline, I mean, it's filled at Chio and Majid, right? I mean, Majid is obviously the one who maybe doesn't quite fit in with the others here. But hero pool wise, if you ignore the fact that there might be some language problems and some culture problems, and there's an established core that maybe will be hard for Majid to fit into, then actually Majid's hero pool is perfect to complement Fielder Cheer. If you think where Dallas had problems in Season 5, it was in double flex meta. They really could have done with someone to take over the heroes that Cheer wasn't as strong at. And obviously we need to talk about the fact that wasn't this Vigilante's role on Atlanta last season? And didn't Vigilante barely play? Will Majid barely play? And the answer, honestly, it might be yes. But there is, if I need to give the optimistic side as well. And the optimistic side might be, if I'm Fielder and Chio, and Stalker as well, the old Atlanta crew, I'm looking back and at Season 6 and thinking, damn, maybe we should have had a few more comps in our back pocket, a bit more experience and understanding at beating things like the Reinhardt or dealing with other things. Or maybe when we played Spark, it would have been good if we didn't just have to dive mirror on every map, if we had a backup plan or a plan B. Maybe it would have been better if we'd involved Vigilante sooner and more often. So maybe, and hopefully, the same is true of Majid. Obviously, they've got a pretty stacked coaching staff in terms of Krusty and Junkbuck, who have also worked with a lot of mixed rosters before. So I think the chances for Majid are actually better than Vigilante last season, based on the fact that everyone's hopefully learnt from that situation. So on the basis that we're maybe in a Lucio Moira meta as well, and Fielder and Chio seem the perfect combo of players for that. Likewise, Stalker and Proper, if we're playing more of this Tracer Echo or Tracer Genji or even Tracer Soldier, it actually suits them. Doesn't put them onto any big hit scan roles that might be tough for them. So, I mean, Falcons are going to be number one in my head. I think this meta is going to be nice for them. And I think, like most people, they're the best team ever assembled. Now, the other actually team which I think is quite obvious to put in the tier break here is actually the WAC team here, which is the old Shock Core, alongside Lip and Shoe, and Overwatch League, well, I guess reigning champion, and probably reigning champion for a while, Churong. So, this team on paper is obviously good. I think everyone raves and loves Shoe for obvious reasons. Probably the best flex support in the world. Lip, one of the best hit scans, and I think if we start to compare WAC to Can They Challenge Falcons, well, suddenly, I think, is Lip a better Sojourn than Proper? Maybe. Probably a better Widow. Some of these other hit scans, maybe he does actually have the advantage on, but at the very least, he's toe for toe for Proper on all of these hit scan heroes. Likewise, Churong, I think this backline has the potential to be as good as Fielder and Chio. I think you do have to expect that on the basis they played together and played more metas together before, have a bit more of a head start and understanding, you'd expect them to do better than Shu and Churong initially. But I think this is something Goomba said in my interview, and you can check that out here. But he thinks this WAC team can actually overtake them, and this backline might actually be better at some point. Maybe not better immediately, but better at some point than Fielder and Chio, at least has the potential. Likewise, when I look at the front three here, this is where maybe people will raise a lot of questions, because aren't these the Shock guys that did really badly last year? And it is. It's no Shock guys who did really badly last year. But I think one thing Heesang was able to prove on Vancouver Titans is that he's not a rubbish player. He's actually really good, and that the Shock situation was just a horrible situation where everyone played pretty bad. So it should really be expected that if you take those players out of a terrible situation and put them in a better situation, we'll see more from them. And I think that's exactly what we will see from Heesang. I don't think Heesang is a worry on this roster at all. I think Heesang is a top-class, elite, flex DPS. He's good. All the heroes he's good at, I think he's like one of the best in the world. And he's even showed on Vancouver Titans he could flex to Soldier and stuff and fit a couple of other heroes in that pool. So Heesang I'm super confident in. Jumpin and Max, I think you can make a bigger argument for maybe there's more questions to be answered here. They both obviously came into the Overwatch League with a lot of hype as they were the next big things on their respective main tank, flex tank kind of role. And that just proved not to be the case at all from what we saw in Shock. But again, it was a really difficult situation. So this is the biggest question mark for me about the roster, the tank line. But I think the rest of the roster is so good. I think Jumpin and Max will be better than they showed last year. If you had to get me to power rank all the tanks, I mean, obviously, if I had to power rank all the tanks in Korea, it's Smurf, and then it's Hanbin. Then we're probably talking Kellen. Then maybe it gets a little bit muddy in terms of who's next. Maybe Donghack, obviously, on certain heroes, but maybe Jumpin and Max enter here. So even considering their bad performance last year, I think they're still actually pretty reasonably placed. They're obviously not as good as Smurf and Hanbin, but I think there's a great chance for these players to prove themselves as not just good enough to be in OWCS Korea, but actually good enough to be on one of the elite teams. So I think WAC for me, I hear right now they're the second best team, and I think these two teams actually have a pretty solid tier break over the others, and I expect them to be not just the top two out of the group stage, but also the top two out of the Korea or out of the Asian LAN and qualify for DreamHack as well. Now, if we pivot our interest to the bottom of the table, we can maybe fit in some of these bottom ones, because I think Sin, Prisa, and Vesta are maybe the obvious candidates for the bottom teams. Vesta Crew is a team I'm not very familiar with at all in terms of a lot of their players. One thing I would say that is true is often when we go to these Korean tournaments, there are obviously all the established talents that everybody loves and gets to see play really well, but as also, very commonly in Korea, the next generation comes through, the new talent. If you look at the rosters of almost all these teams above these two, and even some of Prisa, these are all players we know and recognise. There's very few new players in here, I think, for a lot of Overwatch League fans. So, isn't there potential for Vesta Crew to be the sort of next generation of the up-and-comers or upset some of the more established players and teams? Yes, but I can't really say with confidence that will happen until I see it. I hope that is true, but I actually have no evidence to back that up at this stage. We'll have to wait and see. On the Prisa side, we're kind of in a similar situation. We have maybe a few more familiar names in terms of 2U, who people remember from Seoul Dynasty and the Vegas Eternal. Lee Soo-min, Hyunjae also had like small patches in Overwatch League. Hyunjae was just at the end when he replaced Fixer on Seoul Infernal. But I don't think any of these players... I think 2U's good, but the others didn't impress me. This backline doesn't impress me at all, and is maybe potentially the weakest backline in this top 9. And there's something about when you recycle some of the talent that has sort of been there, done it, and just done okay, that you're sort of limiting yourself. Whereas at least Vesta Crew, there's this open optimism of, I don't know what I'm going to get, maybe it's going to be better. So I'm actually going to put Vesta Crew ahead of Prisa here, and Prisa to finish bottom. And yeah, I still don't think Vesta Crew or Evo can, even if they surprise, I think the gap in quality of roster is actually really high in a lot of the other teams. So I think a lot of these teams are going to be really hard to catch, particularly once we get to the top 6. And maybe I've given away my next ranking by saying there's going to be a top 6. But I actually look in this Poker Face roster, and I don't think these guys compete either. Now, this is the team that had some roster changes. Previously, Probe and Spectra were on this roster. Obviously, with Spectra leaving, there's maybe a few questions raised of, is he going to be an import for an American team? And we don't know the answer to that yet, but the answer is hopefully yes. But for Spectra and Probe, if you put them on this team, or when they were on this team, I'd say those are the two best players. And with Spectra and Probe, I think Probe's probably one of the better hit scans going. We talked about like Proper and Lip, but actually I think hit scan is one of the weaker, if there is a weak role in Korea, it's hit scan compared to all the others. So I think actually having Probe and Spectra meant the DPS line was really competitive with everyone. Obviously they've now lost their two best players. They've added Jasmine, which I think it does upgrade the tank position in terms of now we've sort of got a main tank type guy and an off tank type guy, so we've got more coverage. I think the addition of Becky is good, again a good player, but I look at a lot of these players, especially in the sort of DPS and tank role, and think we're probably just in the decent player category, which is not a bad thing, but you'll see once we start to get some of the other teams, decent player doesn't cut it. There's elite players. Every other team has elite players, at least on some, if not all roles, especially when we're looking at this top 2. So having good players, it doesn't seem like enough. I know a lot of people are high on Simple, think he's one of the biggest up-and-coming flex supports, and obviously I actually think Faith is one of the better main supports going. Unfortunately, again, Faith has the problem that while he might be one of the better main supports in the world, he is also stuck in a region that contains Chio, Chorong, Lee Jae-gong, and Violet. So even if he's one of the best in the world, he's actually only maybe the 5th best main support in this top 9. So I think Faith is a player I like a lot, but is it really not enough on this team for me to rank them particularly highly? Obviously, the fact that they also came through the last chance qualifier doesn't exactly do anything to change my mind there. Since then, they've also lost what I believe to be their 2 best players. There's just a lot of things working against this Poker Face roster. So I think we're going to have to go. We're going to have to go into 7th place, and probably not as exciting as maybe people would have initially thought for this team. Now, this is where we get to what can be described as the nightmare difficulty part of the power ranking. We'll talk through all these teams and then we'll try and place them. And we need to talk through them all first because I think these guys are the top 6. But exactly how you rank these teams is going to be super open for debate. We'll start with Runaway because that's the team that people are probably most familiar with because they brought the brand back. Runner's back in charge. He's got a new team. And on paper, I think he's done a pretty reasonable job of assembling this team. I think I look at this backline, and I actually love this backline. Not everyone is a huge fan of Lee Jae-gong, but I think Lucio and Brig, he's absolutely elite. He's one of the best in the world. He's one of my favourite to watch. I think in terms of raw ability on these two heroes, he is super high. Vigilante as well, a player who we actually didn't get to see a lot of last season because of the Atlanta situation, but another player with super high talent, super high ability. You put these two guys together, and we talked about can Shu and Chirong maybe match or even surpass Fielder and Chio? Well, actually, I think these guys are not far behind, you know. There's it's not as sure a thing, I think, as Shu and Chirong to be competitive, but I think these guys are really going to enter into a pretty good contest with these. And if I start to look at some of the rosters available worldwide, these might be the three best backlines in the entire world. I think you can make an argument for Astro and Landon, especially say if it's a Lucio Bap meta and they're both of the best heroes. Now, Lucio Bap, Landon and Astro can compete with or even surpass some of these guys. But in terms of just general, you know, don't know what the meta is, don't know what it's going to be, these three backlines might be the three best backlines in the world. And we'll get to FTG earlier, but obviously maybe even Finn and Violet can make a fourth behind this top three quite thing. But I'm actually, this backline from Runaway, I think is as good as they could have done, considering the other teams in play. Likewise, I think Zest is an elite tier flex DPS. Really like Zest. Obviously, everyone likes it when he sticks the other Tracer. Very cool Zest pulse bomb. Think he's really talented, good at a lot of heroes. Prophet is a bit of a weird player here for me because he's a hit scan player, but in my head, I really have him just as he's very good at the point and click heroes for Widow type heroes. But when we start to think of the more modern hit scans for Sojourn type heroes, or especially in Overwatch 2 where we just have greater reliance on our hit scans to have to be able to move and walk around and play Soldier or Sojourn, and if we look at this current patch as well, again, Sojourn, these are the type of hit scans we want. I'm not convinced by Prophet at all. So I think Prophet is actually potentially a big problem for this Runaway roster. Likewise, Jay-Woo. If we're starting to talk about Falcons and WAC level and some of these other DPS combos, Jay-Woo doesn't quite feel like he's really done enough to hang with these guys yet. Obviously, could be proved wrong, but need to see it before you can believe it, right? And then when we get to the tank, we've gone for a solo tank, which I think is okay. But I think Mag isn't very high for me. If I was to go and rank all the tanks in Korea, Mag's actually quite low for me. I know initially when Mag first joined the league from Runaway and he was so good at Winston and everyone was raving and ranting about it and super excited, but I don't think he's ever actually really fulfilled that potential. And certainly on non-Winston heroes, I think we see an even bigger drop-off. So the way this meta is going, maybe not super Winston possible, I think it's a huge problem for Runaway, and I think in general Mag might end up being a huge limitation for this roster. So I feel mixed about this roster. There are some bits I really love the backline, think Zest is solid, but a lot of the other bits I don't think are really up to scratch. So ultimately, and maybe this isn't final yet, but I think actually, I don't know where, but I don't think Runaway are making top 4. I don't know if they're 5th or 6th. We'll start with 5th out of respect for the brand, but I can't see him finishing top 4 actually, and maybe I can, when we look at these other rosters, maybe that will start to justify my opinion a little more. So we'll just work our way down the list. So we're at Genesis, and now this is a team that has some quite clear strengths as well. I said earlier that I think Kellen is probably the 3rd best tank in this region, and with the 2 people above him being on the same team, it actually means in theory Genesis have the sort of 2nd best tank line in the region. So I think that's super positive. They have Kalios, who I think is a rock solid player. He's good at the heroes you expect him to be good at. Diva, Zarya, all of this. So while I don't think he necessarily shifts the power ranking, because I think the best thing about Kellen is he's actually pretty good on most heroes. From Winston to Sigma, I think he can actually play a lot of everything. And that if you were actually to have a solo tank, Kellen is the solo tank to have, if anyone. So that's why what WAC have kind of done sort of makes sense where they cover their bases. And obviously they've covered their bases, and FTG did a similar thing, right? Trying to cover their bases with 2 tanks. I actually think Kellen you could get away with solo tanking, but the fact that you add Kalios to play the heroes that Kalios is good at is really fine. I think this tank line is probably maybe 2nd best in the region actually. Jumpin and Max have high potential to upset this, but right now, Kellen and Kalios, for sure 2nd best tanks in the region, or tank line in the region. Choice 01 and Decay. This starts to look to me like maybe a little bit of a budget stalker and proper option. I think we've got a really similar situation here where we've sort of actually kind of got 2 flex DPS, but one of our flex DPS is pretty prominent on hit scan as well. I think Decay, alongside Proper and the like, is one of these few players who can just genuinely play any DPS and hard carry on it. I think if you watched any of FlashOp's career, you will know that Decay was going hard. If you watch any of London's 85 losses to Boston, you would have noticed Decay is going really hard. I think Decay's had a rock-solid Overwatch League season, a great FlashOps performance, and really, especially now that he probably gets to be the star on this team, compared to maybe a Boston team where there's lots of big personalities and lots of big players. I think this guy, everything's going to go through Decay. I think it's going to be a really strong DPS line. And in this current meta, if we're looking at like Tracer Echo or Tracer Sojourn or Tracer Soldier, Tracer Genji, all of these seem super suited to them. And I actually, so far, I love absolutely every bit of this roster. And then we get to the weird part of the roster. So we have Maka, who was obviously the flex support who Florida signed last season, but never actually got to play because he was signed for Overwatch League Season 7, which, spoiler alert, is not happening. But Goomba says he's good, and maybe there's an element of blind faith here, but normally when Goomba says someone's going to be good, he's right. So I think it's really reasonable to expect Maka will be good and live up to the promise. Whether he can enter into this like sort of elite category we have at the top here, who knows? The biggest question for me is this guy on essentially the sort of second support, but will be playing the Lucio for him when they need him to. This is really weird. There's very few players who have successfully transitioned from flex support to main support, especially Lucio. In fact, there might only be one. It might only be Violet. It might actually be an impossible step to take in your career unless your name is Violet. Will Teru add himself to that very, very short one-person list? I mean, for Genesis' sake, hopefully, but let's face it, guys, I don't think so. I think this is going to be a huge problem for him. Maybe in certain metas, where this could be like an Ana and a Kiri, and Teru can play Kiri, this starts to look actually quite reasonable. But outside of that, I feel like Teru is going to be a weird problem. They actually have the reverse problem of Runaway. It's like, Runaway, I love the backline, and there's lots of question marks about this. Genesis, I love the front three, but the backline, I have huge problems with this. If we could somehow have just done this, and if Runner could have just done this and got these two with these three, he probably would have a team to like consistently compete with in his top three, honestly. But that's not the world we live in. But despite all of that, and what we have to factor in, if we're going to just be playing a lot of Lucio Moira, while obviously having a better Lucio Moira is good, you know, like I think Fielder and Chio are probably going to be the best support combo in this meta, but the difference a backline can make when it's a Moira Lucio mirror compared to say when it's maybe an Ana Brig mirror, like think about Overwatch League when it was Tracer Sombra meta. Most of the time, the team with the best backline actually would win that. The team with the best Ana Brig would win that rather than the team with the best Tracer or the best Monkey or whatever it was. But that ability to shift and influence the game is much less on Moira Lucio. So maybe actually, given the fact that they might not be good, but the supports are less important, maybe they can actually be quite good. Or maybe less of a deficit is a better way of saying it. So I'm actually potentially Genesis in third pilled right now. Even though that might be a bit controversial for Runaway fans. So then we get to these last two teams. So Yeti is a team I kind of really like. Again, we've got this sort of DPS combo where it's maybe two people who lean a bit more to flex DPS. We've got Donghak, who I think is actually genuinely one of the best Winstons in the world when he's not getting mentally harassed by his entire team. And this team is actually younger. This seems like quite a young team, so maybe Donghak will actually get to grow into his own a little bit here. Still big questions about Donghak's hero pool. If he can't play Winston or Ball, is he really fitting in? But hey, maybe he can play Ball. And if he can play Ball and we can get like Knife on Tracer or something, and this could start to look quite good. I think Bliss is in like the Faith category for me, where he's not in the elite tier of main supports, and it's sort of like, I guess, big four. There's so many good main supports in this region. He's not in the big four, but I think Faith and Bliss are both they're right behind him. They're rock solid. I think they're more than good enough to play at this level and to be competitive. And especially we're going to be in a Lucio meta most likely, right? So looks really reasonable. Irony is probably the weak link for this on me. I think he doesn't stack up to almost any of the other flex supports going, at least of the sort of like better teams. I think he could be a weak link, but I think in the same way we talked about with Maka and Teru, that if there's a good meta to have a weaker backline in, it's probably a Lucio Moira type meta. You can get away with it a little bit more than you can on, say, an Anna Brig or a Zen Anna or whatever it might be. So I think actually if Donghack can play ball and they can actually work to the hero pool okay. Obviously Donghack's Doom doesn't look that great, and I know there's a lot of Doom right now, but I'm actually kind of excited about this team. I think they could actually upset a lot of people. And in some ways, if it is just like a meta where you can play like Lucio, Moira, Bald, Tracer, it might be about as perfect a meta as you can get for them. Obviously, I think this team is going to hit huge problems in certain metas and really drop off. But in this current, how the patch is shaping up right now, I'm actually kind of Yeti pilled. I don't know if they make top 4 because of it, but I think they do better than maybe people expect. I don't know where I'm going to put them right now, so we'll come back to them. We'll talk about FTG. FTG, I think their backline's actually really good. I know a lot of people aren't big Finn fans anymore after he had a bad season on Shock, but the same thing we said for Jumbin Max and he's saying applies to Finn as well. When we played against Finn with Team UK against South Korea in scrims, Finn played some of the maps when they were doing double flexible, and Finn looked really good. So I think the chances are, guys, Finn's really good. Shock was just an impossible situation to perform well last year. So now he's back with Violet. Violet's obviously class. This is a great backline. Lucio Moira, I think they'll actually be really good at. Alpha Yi gets to play Tracer in his meta. Pretty good for Alpha Yi. I think Flora is not the biggest hit scan talent in the world, but I think he's good. And again, if you factor in that maybe the hit scan area of Korea isn't one of the more impressive parts of the region. Now, actually, Flora does rank quite highly. Like, maybe he doesn't hit, like, proper or lip levels, or maybe even decay levels, but... Well, actually, then maybe he does come in. He's, like, maybe the 4th best hit scan in this region? Maybe close with Proud, I don't know. But it's pretty good, right? Then all of a sudden, maybe their tank line is the one that requires some questioning. I think Bernard is rock solid, but again, Bernard is good at the heroes you expect a flex tank to be good at. Belos Ria is the big question mark. I think he falls into the same category as Mag in a lot of ways, where I'm just like, there's so many heroes I feel like he's more of a problem on than he is a help on. If they can play Burner, they're okay, but I don't know exactly how they go about that now. Maybe if Burner can play Queen. So certain metas, if they can play this version of the roster, I think FTG are really good. But even with Belos Ria, I actually think the rest of this team is really solid. I think it'll be a pretty good meta for him as well, actually. So I can actually see FTG doing well, and I think they're going to be my 4th place team, actually. And this will maybe upset people, but I think I'm actually more Yeti pilled than I am Runaway pilled. So am I happy with this? I think, yeah, I think I'm happy with this. I think the top 2, there's a chance WAC upset Falcons, but I think this will be the top 2 either way. Falcons still much more likely to finish. This bottom 3, I'm actually pretty confident about. I think these guys will be our bottom 3. This middle 4 is where you could easily put any of these teams in any order and probably make a case for it. But I think Genesis is the one most likely to do well. And then FTG, I think, the Finn, Violet, Alpha Yi, it's such a good trio of players. And even though it maybe really seems crazy to say Runaway are going to take Vigilante and Lee Jae-gong and probably one of the best looking backlines in the world and finish 6th, maybe that seems crazy. But again, remember, some of this is meta influence, so I'm thinking like Lucio and Moira, their ability to impact is a little bit less, a bit more pressure on the DPS and the tanks to be the big influencers. And well, actually, I look at FTG, I look at Yeti, I look at Genesis, and they've got the advantage in these areas. So that's it. I'm locking it in. Sorry, Runaway fans, but yeah, no, I think I'm happy with that. Obviously, we'll get to see the games on Friday and find out if I'm right or wrong, or maybe get a bit of an indicator if I've just been barking up the wrong tree completely. But I think there's a lot of debate to be had. So if you have your own opinions or you have your own power rankings, put them in the comments. Reply to me on Twitter or wherever you want to put them. Come join the Discord and discuss them there if you want as well. I think there's loads of debate to be had, and it's super exciting to see how these teams end up. And we can maybe take a look at some of these initial games. This is going to be the first weekend of games. Obviously, the big one to look at here is probably Falcons Runaway. If Falcons just roll them, maybe that's an indication that I'm right. If they don't roll them or if Runaway even win, that's maybe an indication that I'm a fraud. So come tune into the stream and I can find out live whether I'm a genius or a fraud. as this action goes, the best way to think about it, let me find it for you. The best way to think about it is there's going to be 3 game days every week, so a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then they're just going to happen every week. So if I can do it with different colours, it's maybe the easiest way to visualise it. We're starting to get in these blocks of 3 matches, right? And there's lots of good games, and you can go into Liquipedia and find all the best games for yourself. But this is probably the easiest way to visualize how the games are going to go. And I'll be trying to bring you co-streams for as many of these, if not all of them, if I can. And we can sort of see how this unfolds and if the power levels shift as we go along. So, thank you for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the power rankings. Let me know your own power rankings, or let me know why you completely disagree. Enjoy the video, and I'll see you guys next time.